I am going to be teaching about assessment today. So the Spalding book, the How to Teach Adults book, did a really great job describing assessment, which is a very broad topic. I have a few other resources on my PowerPoint that I will kind of talk about a little bit, but this really was the main resource that I was able to talk about. So what is assessment? Assessment, by definition, is the evaluation or estimation of the nature, quality, or ability of somebody or something. So basic textbook definition, pretty self-explanatory. There are 5 principles of assessment, so we'll kind of talk through that a little bit, and I have some examples that I can talk about as well. The first one is practicality. Is it quick and easy? Is it something that that is quick and easy for you to write and quick and easy for them to answer? It should also not take longer than the class. Brief 5 minutes before class starts or at the beginning or at the end is ideal. Reliability. Is it objective? Is this something that every student will be graded the same by every professor no matter what? You don't want to have the same student going to be graded differently by 2 different professors, or you as a professor grading 2 different students differently based on mood, how tired you are, how much you like the student. Anything like that should not affect the grading process. Validity is number 3. Is it measurable? Does this measure what it's supposed to? Is it relatable to what you're doing? And the learning objectives. So for one example that I have is from the book. He talks about if a professor is teaching about an ESL class and they want the student to have an audio playing on their headset. He wants to know, are they understanding the material? It doesn't make sense for the instructor to then hand them a piece of paper as an exam, because that's now relying on them to not only be able to listen to what they're saying, but also be able to understand reading and writing in a different language. So it's measuring too many different objects at one time. And this really ties to the next principle of authenticity. Authenticity is kind of the relatability to the real world. Is this something they can apply in their real life? If it's too authentic, it will probably require too many different skills, such as that previous example. So the last and final principle that we have on here is washback. Washback was a little bit difficult for me to understand at first, but really what it boils down to is process versus product. Is it fair to count off for a student, count off their work if they don't show all of their work? For example, if they're doing a math problem and they come to the correct answer, but maybe didn't show all their work or missed a few steps in their work. Math, in my personal opinion, I believe that maybe you should be looking for those little mistakes in the showing of the work, but I think also in a different setting, if you're teaching a carpentry class, should you count off for the student if they built the chair? You can physically see that they were able to build the chair, but maybe didn't design it all the way through. Just kind of something to think about. There are 2 kinds of assessment. There is formative assessment, so that's going to be your student evaluations of the class, assignments, activities. That's a way for the professor to see how individuals, the class as a whole, how they're progressing. So you can make changes throughout faster and kind of address where they're at. Summative is kind of what we all think of as exams, papers, homework assignments, different things that are graded for an actual grade. A classic summative assessment is a test, but verbal questions is also a summative assessment. So a little more on formative assessments. These are tests with no grades. You should do several throughout the semester. You should do them often so you can make those adjustments early. It shows students that you care and that you're invested in their learning and making sure they're getting the best possible education that they can and learning as much as they can before moving on to the next step and maybe not being prepared. Some questions to consider when you're writing these. What has been the most difficult for you to learn? How interesting is the reading? What can I do to improve the class for you? And are you on track? So really reaching out to them as a person, kind of connecting on that human level of what can we do to make sure that you're the most successful in this class? You know, if you have a book and maybe you didn't necessarily read the textbook all the way before assigning it to your students, then they may not find it as relevant as you thought it might be. So just some examples of formative assessments that I was able to kind of think of are journaling. I know maybe a lot of times in high school, our teachers at the beginning of the day would have us do a journal entry, kind of just to see where you're at, whether it's in your personal life or in school. A lot of English teachers do it to see kind of where you're at for grammar and things like that. Surveys, how is this class going? You know, what can we make adjustments? You can do that by email. You can hand them out at the beginning of class, make them optional, make them for extra credit, and 1-minute papers. So just at the end of the day, what did you learn most about this? What would you like to see different from this lecture maybe in the future, or maybe going on in the class, how would you like me to approach this differently? Summative assessment, there's a lot of different things that go into summative assessment. So true and false questions are kind of the first one that were brought up. It's really a quick testing for a recall of a large body of material. So, I mean, we all know what true and false are. You should really do a lot of them to justify using true and false. You don't want to just do like 4 true and false questions and call it a day. They should be short and declarative, and you should avoid using words like often and usually. Multiple choice is the next one. Multiple choice questions can be difficult to write and to answer for the student, but the correct answer should clearly be the best one. And you should give at least 4 possible options. You shouldn't have like, oh, it could be one or the other. It should be very obvious to those who studied and those who know the material what the correct answer is. The third one is short answer. For short answers, you should ask the students to write in complete sentences because they are brief essay questions essentially. Maybe to define vocabulary and key terms. And you should not, in short answers, you should never grade on grammar and punctuation. You should strictly be looking at the content. If you are going to grade on grammar and punctuation, you should make that very clear in the instructions because typically short answer, they're expecting to jot down a quick answer. The final summative assessment that we kind of talked about in the book were essay questions. This really shows how students are engaged and understand the material because it's a lot more thought out than just a brief short answer or circling a guess that they may not have studied for. They can be difficult to grade because you do have to actually read each one in depth to make sure they got the correct information down. And you should also set expectations in the instructions. Make sure that they know how many pages they need to write if it's an essay, how many paragraphs, what you're looking for. Make sure they know that this is, you know, we need to look at grammar and punctuation and something like this. And then kind of with all of these, it's more particularly in this essay question one, but really all of them should match your learning objectives, where it doesn't do any good to ask any questions that aren't going to apply to the course or really anything relevant. So make sure you're sticking to the learning objectives when writing these questions for assessment. So some summative assessment examples would be tests, quizzes, essays, verbal exams for language classes, such as in that ESL class where maybe he should have done a verbal exam. Repeat what you said to me, what that audio said to you, kind of repeat that back. Book reports, research projects, and honestly 1-minute papers. I believe they can be both. 1-minute papers on the formative side, you can just read them to kind of get more for your own personal information. But the 1-minute papers you can add as a grade if you wanted to. You could kind of assess where they're at, but make sure they understand. Their questions would be a little bit different than in a formative, but I think that you could do both for a grade. Okay, so giving a test. So test is kind of the broad idea of assessment, especially in the summative area. So you should always be consistent, and you could even apply these to quizzes as well, just so there's never any surprises. They always have the same expectations each time. So before the test, space the students out and clear off their desk. Actually walk around, make sure there's no cell phones, there's no materials that aren't allowed to be used. Make sure they're using a pen or pencil, whatever your preference is. If you're teaching something with a calculator, make sure it's the correct calculator and not some high-tech one that will give you all the answers. Physically see it for yourself. Go over the test as a class. Make sure everyone is on the same page and understands. They have the opportunity to ask any questions. You can discuss all those things as a class. And then always begin together. Give everyone the same opportunity. Don't let anyone start while you're talking through it. Make sure that everyone starts together so they all have the same amount of time and it's fair. During the test, these are kind of self-explanatory. You should never leave the classroom while your test is being administered. For obvious reasons, that's just opening up the doors to a lot of cheating opportunities. Approach those who seem lost. You'll know this. You'll be able to tell whether a student is truly lost or if they just don't care to be there. Typically, they make eye contact with you. Approach them. See if you can help answer their question without giving them the answer. Guide them in the right direction, the best you see fit. And then if you have so many students that are lost, you may be able to acknowledge there's a problem on your exam that you need to address to the whole classroom. Walk around the class. Again, make sure everyone's doing the right thing. If you consistently see people doing maybe a short answer where you asked for an essay answer, maybe address that as a class. Hey, number 9, just keep in mind, I need 7 sentences instead of just a one little brief sentence. And you should always give time warnings. The book states that you should give 10, 5, and 2 minutes. To me, that seems excessive. I feel like there's a lot of students that have test anxiety, and by giving them that, always reminding them of the time could make that worse for them. So I think really use that to your judgment. Maybe like a 5-minute warning would be a good option for them, just so it gives them a little bit of extra time to look through their exam or finish up those last-minute questions that they maybe didn't answer as they were going through. After the test, have the student personally hand that in to you. Make sure that they are the ones handing it to you so you know they were the ones that took the exam and that you actually got it and there's a two-way exchange. Make sure every question is answered if the time allows. Now if a student, say you have 20 students in your class and 18 of them bring it to you at the very end of class, at that point the test is over. Now if a student brings it to you after about 20 minutes of taking the test and says they're done, you should probably make sure all the questions are answered and give them the opportunity to go sit back down. If they choose not to, that's on them. But at least make sure every question's answered. Sometimes students don't look on the back. I know I've made that mistake before. Maybe you have a question on the back that they missed or somewhere else that was overlooked. Always thank the student. I know that traditionally it's been the mentality of you're here, like you have to take this exam, but thank them for showing up and participating and studying hard for your exam. That'll really, really hit home for them. I think that'll really sit well and they'll really appreciate that. The last thing I really have to talk about is none of this is personal. It's not about you as the instructor. This is really an opportunity for you to make changes early, either on formative or summative assessments. If you have students that are journaling saying they aren't quite getting this material, you're able to read that and make changes to assist those students. If most of your class is failing your exams, there's probably something within your teaching that needs to be adjusted for that particular class. Every class is going to be completely different every semester. I know we talked about that with an example of APA. In this program, you may have one class come through that knows all of APA. I mean, everyone can always learn more, but they're pretty well versed in APA. But you may have the next class where not a lot do, and it might be in your best interest to address that. Spend some class time and take away from something else, or maybe push something else off to the side for right now and address that, because that's really the basis of your program or your course, whatever that may be. So that kind of goes in with meeting students where they're at. It's going to make your job easier, and it's going to make their job a lot easier and their experience a lot better and more worthwhile. Really, by promoting an unprepared student to the next course, you're doing them a disservice and future students a disservice by not really acknowledging that things could be improved. We can all make improvements. Even the most perfect teacher in the world can always make improvements, especially by class. Every class is different, like I said, so you really have to see what you're working with each semester and be willing to make those adjustments. Don't take it personal, and use that data to better yourself for your students. So that's really about all that I have for assessment. It's a pretty broad topic, so like I said, the Spalding book does a really great job of explaining it and kind of laying everything out and separating formative and summative assessment. These are my other references that I use. I'll also upload the handout that I had to give to you guys, and that's about it. So thank you, and I hope you guys learned about assessment.